All right, everyone. Welcome to Thursdays on the Stoop. This is a Blue Stoop series of free virtual writing workshops led by and for our community members. So this session is going to be Whoosh from Prose to Comics with Kelley Skovron. I'm going to hand it off to her to introduce herself and her work so that you all can learn from her. Thanks, guys.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. As I said before, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to blow right into it here. This is a quick workshop on prose to comics, essentially assuming you have some experience or familiarity with writing prose. And we're going to specifically focus on the things of okay, well, what's different about comics? What are the things, if you're entering comics for the first time, or you've thought about dabbling in comics, or as someone said in the chat, oh, I want to adapt an existing novel into a graphic novel. We're going to kind of address very as much as we can specific to those and kind of what are the deltas between the two. First of all, let's see here. My name is Kelley Skovron. I'm an author of 15 plus books and comics, counting, published 9 countries, 7 languages, blah, 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 blah. Penguin, Random House, Simon & Schuster, Hachette, Scholastic, all different age ranges. I kind of just whatever pays. Sorry, it's true. I've also taught a fair bit, both in person and online, and I enjoy doing that quite a bit. I've also lectured at the Library of Congress on Mary Shelley. That's something I'm very proud of. I'm a huge Mary Shelley fan. Former actress, mother of 2. They're adults, so one's in college and one is doing stuff. I'm also a lifelong lover of both books and comics. Next to my headshot, you'll see here, this is a screen cap of, which I still have, the very first comic book that made a real impact on me. It's from a questionable comic called Rom's Space Knight, and this is Starshine, and she was it's really kind of a gruesome comic that a 4-year-old should definitely not have been reading, but it was the 80s, we did that kind of thing. So anyway, if you want to know more about me or my books, I mostly write fantasy and horror, or adjacent to that kind of stuff, although, like I said before, I'll write whatever pays. And just a note, you're going to see some art throughout here because comics is a visual medium and it really helps to kind of visually see stuff. A lot of what I write, I can't show you. I'm not legally, I don't have the rights to show you because a lot of comics is what we call write for hire, meaning you just are paid a flat fee. It can be anywhere from 50 pages per 50 per scripted page, something like that. It can be a little more sometimes if you're lucky. But 50 is kind of the standard, $50 a page. And you don't have any royalties, you don't have any rights. For example, I would love to show you my cool Disney princess comics, but I cannot. So there you have it. But I can show you the stuff that is here legally. I'm allowed to. The one at the top here, this is from a project that actually never got published, which I'm really sad about. But this is again what happens in publishing. We had the art, we had the package, we had everything together, and then the week before we were going to pitch it to acquisitions board, the editor got laid off, and the whole project kind of stalled out. So it sucks, but we can talk more about the business stuff if we have time and people are interested at the end. But mostly I want to focus on the craft because that's what we're here for. Okay, so what is comics writing? And let me caveat all of this by saying what I'm going to be talking about pretty much the entire time, because again, 45 minutes, is Western comics. And I mean, as opposed to manga, manhwa, webtoons. There's a bunch of different kind of comic book styles, manga being the big difference between Western comics, and that's Japanese comics. And they go completely in the opposite direction from right to left rather than left to right. There's a lot of visual storytelling that happens in manga, some of which has migrated over into Western comics, particularly for younger readers, but by no means all of it. And there's going to be some stuff when I get to panels and framing and that kind of stuff that won't exactly apply to manga. That if I had the time, I would love to go and do a whole section on manga, but we don't have that time. So I thought I'd focus specifically on Western comics. Now, So what we've got here is this is the development, comics writing is the development of a script that is used as a blueprint for one or more artists and letterers. Usually it's not the same person. Sometimes it is, but usually not, to create a comic book. And there's a couple of words I'm using here very specifically that I want to highlight here. First of all, the development of a script. So it's a multi-stage process. You're not just writing a script. It's much more like a movie in that sense, because unlike writing prose, comics involve a lot of people paying them to do the art. Art takes time, it's expensive to make. So there needs to be, you can't just bang it out and send it off to an editor. There needs to be a lot more kind of stages to the process and approvals and, various gates. And so that's what you're seeing here, this outline. So it starts with a pitch. You'll write just a quick pitch. Usually that will, if that gets approved, great, you move on to the next step, which is going to be an outline. And when I talk about outline, it could be a bullet list, but generally speaking, better to not. Better to make this have at least some sense of the vibes, the moods, the flavor. It's a difficult line to walk, to kind of excitedly and evocatively describe a story rather than just write the story, but that's kind of what you need to do at this point. You want to start giving people, the editor and the artist, textures. And then once, and usually like if whoever's above the editor, like if you're writing for Disney, there's like the Disney people above the editor who also need to approve at every single step in this process. They need to approve the pitch, they need to approve the outline, blah, blah, blah. Assuming all of that gets approved, then you actually write the script itself. And that's what we think of as writing. Like that's like from a prose writer perspective, this is the part where you bang it all out and put it on the page and kind of see if it all works, honestly. And so, but unlike with writing prose, this is not sacrosanct. This is not the document that everything else springs from. Like we're accustomed to in prose writing, we don't have much control over what's on the cover, what's on the back, what's on the, the blurbs and all that. We don't have much control over that. But what's in between the covers, we typically have control over that. Like I am the end all and be all of what that phrase says, like no one editors can make line suggestions, but they can't dictate a line, or usually they can't. But in comics, that's the opposite. And because this is the last phase is going to be the lettering pass. And this is pretty key. And we'll get to this in more detail later on. We'll get to all of this in more detail on, but the lettering pass essentially is you've written the script, you've given it to the artist gives it back to you sans lettering. And without the lettering, you need to go through panel by panel, see what they've done. It isn't always exactly what you wrote, but the challenge is that from a purely just logistical standpoint, if nothing else, it's cheaper for you to change the script than it is for the artist to change the art. It's just what it is. And so you need to go through, and this is, essentially the revision process, and figure out, and I'll show you an example of when it doesn't work, to make sure that the panels, that what the artist has drawn and created, the dialogue and the panels that you've written match up. And if they don't, you need to be the one to change stuff. Because again, art's way harder to fix or change, and usually takes longer too. So, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later, what I mean specifically, but this is the broad kind of flow, the workflow, if you will, of comics writing, the development of a script, right? And what you'll notice at the bottom there is that there are two elements that I've kind of left floating because you may or may not have any access to those elements: story development and character/world design. I've worked on projects where I was very involved in both of those. I've worked on projects where I was involved with story development, but had absolutely no input in the character and world design. Frankly, that I did not see what the character design was until I got the lettering pass. Like I didn't know what the character would look like. I would describe it as I wanted it to be in the script to some degree, but if the editor and the artist decided that something else worked better, they're not, depending on the project and the publisher, they're not necessarily going to let you know. So, so then you find out at the lettering pass, oh, that's what that character looks like. How interesting. And that again might be a good moment to look at the letter when you're doing the lettering pass to tweak the dialogue or what have you. Um, Also, when you see the characters' expressions, again, good time to tweak the dialogue if need be to kind of line up. Is the mouth opened or closed? Does it look weird to have them dialogue bubble with closed mouth? There's the considerations. So this is the general overall structure of developing a comic script. Now let's get a little more granular here. So this is generally speaking, the anatomy of a page. I don't know how, I'm just going to kind of assume that we're going from scratch here. So this is one page and it's 5 panels on a page. You've got, obviously, each panel is a different kind of section there. You've got the bubbles are like the dialogue within there. It could be a speech bubble or a thought bubble. Usually the speech bubbles have a straight line. Usually the thought bubble has like either, kind of a cloudy line or a dotted line, depending on the artist's style or the letterer style, I guess is more accurate. There's also the borders around each panel. That's that line around the panel. And the gutter is the space between that panel. And let's not skip over that, as you'll see, a lot can be made of the gutter, particularly when it comes to pacing. And I saw someone in the chat who's been reading the Scott McCloud book, so you know what I'm talking about. We'll get there. So yeah, this is a standard set of 1 page, 5 panels, anatomy of a page. But, like anything else, rules are made to be broken. So here are just a few of the many, many, many things you can do to play with that initial structure. So you have the structure, right? You need to know it, you need to understand it, you need to be comfortable with it. If you don't read comics on a regular basis, I strongly urge you to start reading comics if you plan to write them, because this visual language becomes very important. But so on the left-hand side here, we've got what we might call a grid breakdown. You'll see it starts in the upper left of that page. We've got some pretty standard neat panels, but as we go, the borders start to break down. The borders between the panels start to break down, and then we've got the character at the far right panel is isolated. We're using that gutter to isolate her, that white space in between, and she's lost her panel border. So she's really starting to feel A, isolated, and B, kind of, what's the word? She's starting to feel unsettled, upset, we're visually indicating that. And then as the page goes down, the panels start mashing into each other as the characters begin to conflict with each other. So by the end of it, we have no panels, nothing at all at the lower right hand. So we're just kind of floating off. So that's like a grid breakdown. And as you can see, it's, visually expressing that kind of conflict. In the middle one, we've got no grid at all. And this is a kind of obviously more kind of surreal moment in this storyline, where we have discrete panels and they're written on the script as discrete panels. And your eye, generally speaking, knows how to follow it. That said, the artist is, and I encourage them to do this, blending it all together so you're maybe not entirely sure what comes next. And that is by design to make you feel, the reader feel unsettled, unsure, questioning reality here, just as the protagonist is also unsure and questioning reality here. So that's no panels, no grid at all. And then the last one on the right here, we've got the splash page, the good old splash page. And this is just a single image taking up the entire page. And we'll get to kind of like how best to deploy these in a minute here. But obviously you would just say like page 3 or whatever. You could say panel 1 and just have that one panel, or you could just say splash page, which I usually do. If you can also have a double splash page, also called a double spread, in which you've got a single image stretched across both pages. Like imagine a comic book, you open it up and you've got a left page and a right page. And keep that visual in your head because we're going to need it in a minute. you've got a whole spread of a page, pick one single image that's wide across both of them. And you could do all sorts of stuff with that. You can have it be one single image. You could do a sort of no grid design that stretches across both pages. There's all sorts of cool stuff you can do with that. Each one brings a certain kind of element to it. And we'll get to, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So first, kind of on the macro level, when we're talking about page layouts, there's a couple of things that I really want to kind of draw your attention to. So page one, when you're writing a script, is always, always, always going to be like, again, let's go back to that visual in our minds. As you can see here, we've got a comic book, it's opened up. And I know a lot of people read comics digitally now, but there's still a lot of people who read them, the good old-fashioned way. And it's still kind of what the cadence is kind of presumed to be. So page one is always going to be on the right side of the page, the right page, I'm sorry, of the open book, right? And you should always consider that to start there for timing, but also when we talk about like a splash page, let's say it's a surprise. Let's go back to this splash page where we see Bloody Mary's surprise emerge from a toilet. We were not expecting that. We're all quite shocked. And so what I've done is that's, of course, going to be on the left page. So what you do is you see in the right page is the setup for a reveal, and then the odd number page. And then so imagine that the reader opens it up and then they see the big splash that we're surprised on the left side of the page. And this is really, really key to writing comics, like to get that cadence going, to figure out how to plan ahead so that you can hit those reveals. Because comics is such a visual medium, in prose, it doesn't matter because unless someone's like really amazing and can like suck in an entire page of text and understand it at once, and there are people like that. Maybe, I don't know, not me. But comic books, you can quickly glance and be like, oh, I know what's coming on. Like if I've got the 2 pages and I'm on the left page and I've got the setup for the reveal, and then I see it on the right side of the page. Well, I can kind of see it out of the corner of my eye. I know exactly what's going to happen. It's not much of a reveal. It's not much of a surprise. And sometimes that's actually what you want. Sometimes you actually want to give them kind of like, oh God, I know what's coming. But sometimes you want it to be a surprise. And if you do want that surprise reveal, it always, always, always needs to happen on the left side of the page, the even number page. So this is where page numbers becomes really, really important. As I said before, the 2-page splash is often called a spread. And then this is less common now, or at least for right now, knock on wood. It used to be that ads and interruptions and that kind of stuff was pretty common. And you'll still kind of see that sometimes in like a big mainstream book, like a Marvel book or a DC book. But by and large, you don't have to worry so much about like interruptions. But if you'll see on this page layout graph, pages 18 and 19, you'll see page 18 is completely blank. It doesn't say story page. That's presumed to be like an ad page, either for another comic within the publisher or something else entirely, like weight gain or, whatever those muscle things that they used to do in comics. I don't remember if anyone remembers those. So this is kind of broadly speaking, whenever you're putting together a script, always be mindful of the odd and even number pages, reveals versus like allusions, that sort of stuff. And also, of course, if you're doing a double spread, that's going to take up a big chunk of space. And one of the reasons it's good to be preoccupied with this page count also is because depending on what kind of comic you're doing, if it's being published in print, either as a floppy, like a traditional comic book, or as a graphic novel, because comics are expensive to make, art is expensive to make, there's generally going to be a hard cutoff in terms of page count. 32 pages is a standard, or sometimes 23 pages is a standard for a floppy. 200 pages might be a standard for a graphic novel, kind of on the younger end. It can be the older can be longer, but like if you're looking like a YA older middle grade graphic novel kind of thing, you're looking at no more than 200 pages. And oftentimes they will hit you like on the dot with that. Like if it's 201 pages, you got to figure something out. And the problem, of course, is that if you've timed everything out to be revealed on the even number of pages and they say you got to cut a page, well, then when you do cut a page, depending on where it is, that might affect the reveals, and then you got to do a whole bunch of juggling to get there. It becomes a real logistical challenge. And for me, I also do technical writing sometimes. And so for me, I love comics because it hits both of those parts of my brain at the same time, like creative and like technical. And I love that kind of push-pull tension between the two of them. If you're uncomfortable or find that onerous, I'm not sure. Not sure comics is a great choice. Or lots of practice, which we'll get to. But before we do that, I want to talk about pacing. So there's two things to think about with pacing. One is at the page level. I'm showing you two different examples of comics panel arrangements, and they both have, I think, about the same number of panels, but they're presented very differently. On the left-hand one, this is a very kind of quiet, contemplative moment. You see some really wide gutters here, and like an extra wide gutter around the outside. The panels are all distinct from each other. There's a bit of gutter in between each one of them, and so and then also they're all very square and regular. Whereas the one on the right is like, first of all, there's no white at all. It's like dark, or it's, this is a kind of a more actiony moment. It's a chase sequence actually. And which is a little challenging to do in still images, but anyway. So you'll notice that like the panels go all the way to the edges sometimes, like that top panel goes all the way to the edge. So no gutter there at all. And then the panels are kind of slanted. They're kind of mashing into each other in a more chaotic way. So all of this is saying something to the reader. The reader may not be aware of it, but on some level, in the same way that there's a million little tricks you can do in prose writing to kind of encourage the reader to read at a certain pace in a certain section. This is what you would do as the writer to encourage things in comics. So a couple rules of thumb: the more panels on a page, the slower the reader will go. The more bubbles on a page, the more speech bubbles, the more they have to read dialogue, thought bubbles, that kind of stuff, the slower it'll go. And when I say slower, I don't mean that's bad. Of course, like sometimes you want to slow down, like this, the scene in the bathroom needs to be slow. It's a really intimate moment between friends. It's the scene just before this was super crazy chaotic, and we needed a moment, the reader needs a moment to catch their breath. And kind of you're giving them a rest almost, because there was a lot of visual stuff to process on the previous page, and now you can take a breath. And we've got breath. And imagine, and this is getting more into the line level here, you see how wide these gutters are. That's also giving us some breath in the line pacing, or as we would say here, the panel pacing. In addition to slowing the pacing down by the number of panels, you also slow the pacing down by the gutter in between it. The brain just immediately inserts a pause when it sees that very clear, demarked white space in between each panel. We've got the sharp borders, we've got the clean white space. The brain just immediately starts taking a different rhythm when it sees these things delivered. And so this is kind of how you control the pacing of a scene, as opposed to on the right here, where again, it's all mashed together. Like you pretty much know what order it's going in, but it's coming at you real fast and hard. And there's also not a lot of dialogue. So you're not slowed down in that way either. So in addition to the actual number of bubbles too, you also want to be aware of how much is said in the bubbles. And there's some other challenges there we'll get to in a little bit later on. But just always be aware of these kind of visual cues on the page, how to kind of control the pacing for the reader. Um, how much time do we have? Oh gosh. Um, so let's address working without dialogue, because comics, maybe more than anything, is really, really good at this. I've seen entire comics. I'm thinking of mine, the Pizza Dog comic from Matt Fraction, for Hawkeye. It's just a simple one-shot storyline from the superhero Hawkeye comic, and the whole thing takes place from the point of view of the dog, and it's like a whole story, and there's no dialogue because it's a dog. And it's not one of those comics where the dog talks. So it's just a regular dog. It's not like a superpower dog. And so you get to have a whole mystery, like a whole like a crime mystery told from a visual of a dog. I get to do something similar recently for a Moana comic. Hey Hey the Chicken. They want an entire Hey Hey the Chicken story. And Hey Hey does not speak. He's a chicken. And so I got to learn a lot about like how to tell working with a story without dialogue. So a couple of things I really want to draw to your attention here. Um, Clean the beats. Like everything needs to be very distinct and clear. Don't muddy them, don't fudge them. And we'll talk about that a little more in a little bit here. Um, but I just want you to really keep that in mind. Each distinct moment. Let's look on the right panel here in this action sequence here where she pulls her arm away. Then she like gives him the leg sweep. Then because of the leg sweep, he hits his chin. Then she bangs her fist on this plate, which we've visually established in the previous page. Sorry. She grabs it, tosses it, hits the guy. He's down, and everyone is escaping. So these are each moment, they're not bled together. You can't assume necessarily that they'll know. A different kind of storytelling visually here on the left, where it's really a kind of a static image. And you can play with static image in this way because then the bits that do change are more pronounced. So in the first one, we've got a guy, he's like waiting out in his car to pick somebody up. In the second one, she steps out of her house. He sees her. We've got the little kind of like, oh, I'm kind of like surprised, or I'm excited, or those little lines. And these are kind of visual storytelling elements, these exclamation lines of like, you don't, it can be a neutral reaction, but it tells you that, oh, we've noticed each other. And then in the next one, she's walking away. He's looking very concerned. And she keeps walking in the last one, and he's banging his head on the steering wheel. So we just told a very visual story right there, no dialogue other than onomatopoeia, which let's talk about onomatopoeia for a minute. It took me a while to get over onomatopoeia because find it very uncomfortable to like come up with whoosh and bang and meow and like what does a falling chicken sound like? I ask you. But you need to kind of get through onomatopoeia both in terms of it's just a convention in comics like snatch. As you see, it doesn't make a sound, but a lot of comics will have these kind of action things, especially in a nonverbal sequence. It's just kind of a visual language convention. And in fact, I would say, if anything, it's gotten more popular over the years as the influences of manga, which is heavy on onomatopoeia, has kind of gotten more and more mainstreamed into Western comics as well. So onomatopoeia is your friend. It's also important for creating sound. And those will usually be an entire line on their own, sound effects. And that is another thing that took me a little while to become accustomed to. Like, there are going to be moments, especially in non-dialogue sections, where you're going to want some sort of sound. And what that is it just the sound of footsteps in an empty room? Sounds kind of eerie. You can create a lot of atmosphere with onomatopoeia. So never forget onomatopoeia. It is your friend, I promise, even if you're a little uncomfortable with it at first. Now, juxtaposition of images. This is actually a really simple concept, but best explained rather than verbally, visually, unsurprisingly. So Juxtaposition of images. Here is example one. We have a picture of a deer and a picture of a fox. Looks very bucolic, pastoral, very peaceful. Oh, it's lovely. Nature, it's beautiful. I love it. Big fan of foxes in general, so I had to include one. So this is example one. The juxtaposition of images is when you tell a story or create a mood without words and only by showing two pictures one after another or side by side. So in this case, here's our example one. We've told the story of a kind of a bucolic nature landscape and like lovely woodland creatures, maybe some like Snow White stuff going on here. Now I've changed the juxtaposition. This is example two. And suddenly, just by changing one picture, I'm telling it a completely different, in fact, opposite story. Right now, we're talking Bambi here. Now we are just by changing that one image, no dialogue, no explanation, you know exactly what this story is. And it's a very different story. And now you're probably a little concerned for that deer. But I haven't said this person is going to shoot this deer. Like I didn't need to do that. You just immediately see those images and you understand what is being said here in a way that actually gets in deeper than it would be if I told you. It's the classic show, don't tell, but in this case, we mean that quite literally. Visually, people have visceral reactions to guns and often to deer, and particularly when you put them together. So image juxtapositions, choose them sparingly, but they can be really, really effective. They can be a real effective gut punch. Again, sparingly. It's like those M dashes. They're great, but one a page or whatever it is, whatever your personal rule on not excessive M dashing. Or ellipsising or whatever it is your special thing is. So yeah, that's image juxtaposition. It's an easy concept to understand and a challenging one to kind of incorporate into your storytelling, particularly if you're not used to a visual medium. Time, how are we doing? So now we're getting to like the meat of like, this is the bread and butter here. This is what you're writing in a script. So just really basic logistics. First of all, what you're seeing is a script this is how Disney prefers their scripts. Does that mean every comic book publisher prefers it? No, absolutely not. There is no hard and fast rule. I'll give you a recommendation at the end on if you were curious to see a bunch of different examples, what those other examples might look like. But this is just what Disney prefers. And so what we're doing here is we're seeing, you start at the beginning with a page number, and you always do a page break at the beginning of each page, even if there's only a little bit, like one panel description from the previous one, you always start with a page break at the beginning of a page. It's just easier for the artist. Oftentimes they will print it out and or have it side by side on two monitors or something like that as they're working. So it's just helpful to the artist to have each page be its own page break, distinct thing. And at the top of the page is a good place if you want to talk about that the anatomy of a page panel layout stuff that we were talking about earlier. Here's where you would say, in general, I would like it if we have these 5 panels and they're arranged in this way. For example, you might have a 3-part joke, where there's an intro, a setup, and a punchline, or a setup, a punchline, and a reaction. And you want all 3 of those on the same visual line, or else it won't be funny in the same way. It wouldn't hit as hard. Or maybe you want the first 2 and then the reaction on the third below it. However you decide you want to do it, here's a great place to say that to the artist. That said, does that mean the artist will do it? Not always. And depending on the contract you're under, you may not have a say in that. But it never hurts to ask. Generally speaking, when I start a project, I talk with the artist and I say, okay, what would be helpful for you? And I've never worked with an artist who didn't say something along the lines of, tell me what you want and I may or may not make it happen. But they're inevitably like, it's helpful to know what your intention is though, and then I can kind of see if it works for me. So by and large, it's better to be as descriptive as possible without expecting it to be followed to the letter, because it probably won't be. Okay, so yeah, you lay out suggestions at the top underneath the page number. And then you're going to break it down panel by panel. Panel one, this happens. Typically, the characters that appear on that panel, like visually on the panel, are all caps, and the characters that are not visually on the panel are not all caps. This is helpful later on for the letterer as he or she or they are scanned through um, as they scan through the looking for, oh, where do I need to put letters? Where do I need to put dialogue boxes? They're going to look for that. And the artist will as well. They'll look through and scan through and be like, okay, what character designs do I need here? Um, so, you'll see like Louisa leans in close to look at the Dracula orchid. This is from Encanto. Um, and so, and you just break it down panel by panel. Not every panel is going to have dialogue, but when it does, for whatever reason, they like the dialogue numbered. I don't know why. I guess it's easier for them to reference it later. So on the, I do like a number one and then the character name again, and then what they say. And if they say multiple things, but you want those divided up for pacing wise into two bubbles. Like say, for example, they say something, they think about it, they say something else. If you want to imply that pause in their own thoughts, rather than just doing a dot, dot, dot in the middle of one bubble, you can give them two bubbles to think about it. And that will kind of automatically, for the reader, clue them in, like say something, think, say something. And if you do that, you'll need to have each one on a separate line. So that's the kind of general layout for that. I like to put like a character angle, a POV kind of stuff when I'm framing the panel and be like, we're looking at this over Louisa's shoulder as she's looking at the orchid. So we might see like just part of her, but our main focus in the center of the panel is the orchid. I often see things in kind of a very visual style anyway, just naturally, even when I'm writing prose. So this is super easy for me to just say like this panel, here's the framing. I also have a background in theater, so I know kind of like where things are staging wise. Like the further back it is, the more power you give it, the more attention, like as long as it's not small. But like if you have something in the lower left and the upper right corner, the thing in the upper right corner is going to take more attention than the thing in the lower left corner. Our eyes are just automatically drawn to that thing in the upper right. So those are considerations. Again, that doesn't mean the artist will use them, but I always find it helpful to put in there. What's in the foreground, what's in the background. Be as explicit as you possibly can be with the understanding that it may not be followed. Now, getting on to something that someone I think in the chat mentioned about wondering how to do like internal emotional stuff. In a comic book, right? Like you can't describe how they're feeling. So how do you do it? And this is where, I mean, it probably somewhat depends. Of course, a lot of this depends on your preference. But what I have found to be effective is to work with the artist and to talk about what they want. If possible, you can't always like, for like my Disney stuff, I don't necessarily always get to talk to the artist. But certainly for all the stuff you're seeing in here, I've had direct conversations with the artists. And so what I found helpful is to not dictate a facial expression necessarily, because that's somewhat limiting to the artist. And if they don't like it, they'll just do whatever the hell they want. So I find it much more helpful to convey in the script, in those little panel dialogues, the character's emotional state and let the artist, and this is their job, like they are the artist, they are the visual expert, let them interpret that emotional state how they like or what makes sense to them. Is it always going to end up the way you want? No, probably not. But this is a collaborative art form. And so kind of working within those kind of support structures, because I think a collaborative art form has a lot to offer. you do have to kind of think about things somewhat differently then. And so, I mean, you can try to dictate the expressions on their face and so forth like that. And every once in a while, if I think it's really, really key, I do. Um, or I might say they feel this way internally, but they're trying to look happy about it. That's another way I might say it. Again, I'm not being specific and prescriptive in terms of what it visually looks like so much as I am letting the artist know what's actually going on under the surface, giving you all of that. And feel free to go on as much as you want. Like if it takes half a page to describe one panel, that's fine. Like nobody's complaining because like you're not getting paid more for that. It's not a word count thing. Like you get paid a flat rate of 50 per scripted page, not pages of script. So from page 3 can take 5 pages long, you're still only getting that $50, and then you get another 50 for page 4 and so on. So, nobody cares how long you take. The artist might be a little annoyed if it takes too much time, but I think generally speaking, they always find it helpful to get more rather than less. That's certainly what I've encountered. Um, okay, so we're kind of coming up on it. Ugh. I did want to do a really, really simple exercise with you guys if you're amenable. It doesn't have to take, I'm just going to give you a few minutes here. But I would love for you to take something to write on and or on your computer or whatever works for you, and give me a simple, like a standard panel layout, which is just as you see on here, six panels. Um, and just think of something really simple to do. And I'm talking really dead simple, like um, get a drink from the refrigerator, or, something along those lines, or, text a friend or something like that. And think about like an establishing shot, and just really keep it clean moment by moment, and just try to list out the steps for a single sequence, and then try to draw it. It can be like stick figures, no one's going to see it, doesn't matter. Um, and just try to kind of like visually map it out on a page, because there's something about forcing yourself to actually do that that can really kind of help get the idea of like what I meant earlier when I said like each action clean, its own thing, discrete, don't fudge from one to the next. So I'm going to give you a few minutes here. I'm going to have a sip of water. And if you could just, you don't have to, obviously don't want to, but if it would be helpful. And if anyone has any questions about it later, um, that works for me too. I don't mean to rush, but we're getting down to it. Um, so I don't know what I would love to if find out what how that went for anyone. Um, this is a really simple version of it, but it gets more complicated the more characters you put into it. And then if you've got multiple characters doing multiple things at the same time, you also have to keep those clean. You know, their reactions, their responses, all of that stuff needs to be clear and delineated, or it gets really muddy and confusing to the reader. And they're not necessarily, their eyes won't know where to go. And if their eyes don't know where to go, you've lost them. Like, it's that simple. Um, Sometimes you can get them back, sometimes you can't. So I just wanted to kind of really highlight this, and I'd urge you, if you're going to write your own comics, to do this at least initially. Like, you don't do it forever. I don't do it anymore. Well, every once in a while, I'll still sit down and whip out a piece of paper and do this because there's just some times where the logistics get real complicated and thorny. And it's good to get that kind of back to basics refresher of like, here's all that really needs to happen. But certainly when you're first starting out, I urge you to kind of do this exercise while you're scripting. Um, if you're not sure about a sequence, like take a moment, get out a piece of paper and do this and kind of really work it out for yourself on the page, what it's going to look like. It can really, really help. If you're not sure about like what I was talking about earlier, like POVs and camera angles and that stuff like that, this is another great way to experiment with that. Just stick figures, you know, you're not, it's no pressure, but can really be helpful down the road to communicate what you want the artist to do. The clearer and better communication you give them, the more likely they are to execute the vision that's in your head. Um, so, and this is kind of where I'm going with all of this is comics is a collaborative art. We were seeing here a lot of the art you've seen is from a project that actually comes out at the end of this month called Going Under. Um, it's been kind of a strange but fascinating collaboration with me, an artist, and a YouTuber. Um, it's been a real experience. And so what you're seeing on the left here is you're seeing the initial kind of post-it note sketches that were just kind of brainstorming of my script. And then she sits down and like comes up with the layout and then starts sketching, and then we see the art. And you know, I mean, there's actually several steps in between here, but it was getting a little crowded on the slides. So you know, you're the writer, but there's also the artist, and then there's also the letterer, who is usually not the artist. In fact, most artists will swear up and down, I can't do lettering, I can't do lettering. It's like, it's what you hear all the time. And then you've got your editor, of course, always. Sometimes you've got sometimes the art is actually broken down. When you get to the like the Marvel DC point, you've got someone doing pencils, someone doing inks, someone doing colors, someone maybe doing backgrounds. You know, there's a whole team of artists in order to churn it out fast enough on a monthly, you know, kind of issue basis. I've never worked with that much. The most I've worked with is an artist and a letterer, as far as the visuals go. You know, and then a lot of times you might have a subject matter expert or stakeholder, whatever, your Disney executives or whoever that need to be appeased. Or sometimes a YouTuber. So you know, but coming from a theater background, that works for me. I can think of it like a theatrical production. And that's helpful to me because we are making a thing together. I do find that some writers, if they don't have that collaborative art experience background, struggle a bit in letting go of some of that. And you know, and that's totally fair. But you know, if you want to get into comics, it is a collaborative art. Um, you know, and so for example, I mentioned earlier the lettering path, as you can see. Um, you know, this is the outline, the script, and then the art, and then you get the lettering pass, and then you get the lettering. And let's say when during the lettering pass, maybe you missed a scene, maybe you didn't quite perceive something was right. And then you get something like this where an entire panel is covered because the letterer was like, well, gotta put it somewhere. And you had way too much dialogue going on in that bubble there, entirely too much. And then you're horrified and embarrassed and you have to apologize. You don't have to apologize. I just apologize compulsively to everyone. So that's my thing. So better to catch it earlier in the lettering pass than to have something tragic like this show up. Um, this was kind of early on in my experience with this artist. And that's another thing. The more you work with an artist, the more you kind of know what to expect from them, how they will interpret your script. I didn't expect them to lay out the panels the way they did because it wasn't the way I described. But I should have gone back in that lettering pass and been like, oh, they didn't lay this out in the same way. I need to readjust my dialogue to accommodate this different panel layout. And I didn't do that. And this is the result. Now, this thankfully did not make it into print. The editor, as you can see, there's a little comment bubble on top of the speech bubble, and that's the editor being like, Kels, is this intentional? And then me, of course, having to go back and fix it. But so I just wanted to kind of, there's so many people that work on these at so many stages, and kind of giving up some of that ego, and working all together is like super, super valuable skill to learn when writing comics, and it will also keep you way more sane. Um, so I just wanted to kind of highlight that that collaborative aspect, which I genuinely love. I love being in like a private Discord with the artist and the the editor and whoever else, the stakeholders and something. We're all kind of, we've got a mood board going, we're all banging off of each other and being like, oh, what about this? What about that? Oh, that's so cool. That kind of stuff can be really, really fun. So it's a different kind of fun, but it's fun in its own way. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that. Running out of time. Um, Last but not least, some recommended readings if you want to take a screenshot of that real quick there. I'm going to look through the chat, see if there's any. Yeah, so the script examples that you if you want to look for script examples, that panel 1 comic book scripts by top writers edited by Nat Gertler is really great. It's got like a lot of like big name people like Ben Dennis and um Gaiman and Alan Moore and just like tons of fancy people. I am out of time, aren't I, Sam? Um,
You have 3 minutes.
okay, okay, cool.
You've got a
All
few
right.
questions in the chat, I think 7.
Yes.
So
Oh gosh.
go
Okay.
through as many as you can.
Yeah, yeah.
This will
Um,
be shared after as well. So
yeah, and if you want, you can email me at writer@kelleyskovron.com. I'm fine with that. I'm used to it. At least the question, some stories you pitched, but is it common for the publisher to give you the basic plot and character development, have you flesh it out? Um, Sometimes, usually they don't know what they want, though. Usually part of what you are is the story engine. They might say, we want something with these characters, but we don't know, and we want them to do something happy. Okay. So then you have to go back and kind of like turn that into an actual story. Or maybe the stakeholder has an idea, and an idea is not a story, it's just an idea. And then it is your job then, I guess you could call that fleshing out, but really they don't even have like a structure. They just have like, what if Alice in Wonderland, but creepypastas? And that's what they've got. And they hand that off to you. And it stars this character named Lauren, who looks a lot like our YouTuber. That's all you have to start with, and then you flesh it out from there. And then you pitch that to them, and then they go, I'll buy that, or they go, how about not that? So I'm not sure how common that is. I think generally speaking, you will find that if you're not doing a totally creator-owned thing, that what you'll end up doing is just kind of finding using pre-existing characters and pre-existing settings. And they'll have like Disney has very specific things of what you do and don't do. Like I don't know if they'll get mad at me for saying this. There is a princess handbook that tells you princess by princess what this princess will and won't do, what they will and won't say, how they will and won't act. It's quite specific. Some people find it off-putting. I actually found that compared to some other other companies that I've worked with, honestly, I found it nice because at least I didn't have to like play 20 questions with them and be like, how about this? No, how about this? No. Like they tell you what they want and then you just do it. So again, it's not for everyone, but that's what a write for hire gig typically entails, something along those lines. And it varies from person to person. Question, what do you think about comic book classes or attending cartoon school? I
just
mean,
quickly, Kelly.
Oh,
I will say we are at 5 o'clock here.
ugh. All right,
Um,
sorry.
but I will say with the recording, all of these questions are going to be saved.
Mm,
So if you want to follow up in any way, feel free. Um, and like I said, this recording will be sent out as well. So I am just going to drop some links in the chat for future Thursdays on the Stoop. Thank you so much, Kelley, for sharing this wonderful presentation.
my
This was
pleasure.
really, really insightful. Thank you, everyone who participated and shared your questions. They were also great questions, and I hope that you can get them answered in some way, shape, or form. We also have a
Just
weekly.
email me if you want. Writer at Kelley Skovron. It's totally
Beautiful.
fine.
Also,
Or
Kelley, someone asked
Blue
for your
Sky.
website in the chat, and I did
Oh
share
yeah.
it there.
Oh cool.
But I've added some links to the feedback survey. If you enjoyed this, please, please, please fill it out. The information for fall classes coming up at Blue Stoop, you can sign up for the wait list, our newsletter, and of course, donate to continue supporting our free programming if you enjoyed it. I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you all so much.